So guys, let's look at another vision from the Old Testament that is dealing with this idea of holiness, dealing with this idea that we are impure and we need to be cleansed and all these kind of purification laws. And then it's a vision from the Old Testament that is pointing us towards this future thing that is going to be happening and transpiring, that's going to show and reveal to us all of this. And so we just got through looking at Isaiah's vision of the coal on the lips. It's a relatively popular vision, but I don't know how many times we've thought about and understood this idea of that's pointing to a cleansing that is going to happen, a purification, that instead of the contaminated thing contaminating clean things, now the most clean, the most pure, the most holy thing is actually purifying the unclean things. Let's look at another one, and this is from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is another prophet of the Old Testament. He has lots of different visions. One of his most popular ones is Ezekiel and the dry bones, which is a very interesting, crazy kind of vision thing that he has. But we're going to look at this vision. It's a kind of a long area of the vision of this. It's kind of a trip that he takes, if you will, through many chapters, starting a few chapters before where we're going to read, which we're going to be looking at verse 47. So Ezekiel 47. And this is kind of in the middle of his vision and his tour of this new temple, this new temple that's going to be coming in the future. Again, this is a vision from the Old Testament pointing us into the New Testament. And we're going to pick up kind of right here in the middle. Ezekiel, kind of like Isaiah, we have to remember he's been in this tradition and this way of how it works with the rituals, with the priests, with the purification laws. He knows the way it's supposed to work, the presence of God, the temple, all of these things. And this is what he sees in his vision in chapter 47. Let's look at it together. It says, and afterward he brought me, okay, so first thing, use your context. What is afterward? That means there was other things happening before this in this entire vision of the temple. So let's keep reading. Afterwards he brought me again to the door of the house, meaning the temple, the house of God. And behold, waters issued out from underneath the threshold of the house on the eastward and from the forefront. And the house stood towards the east, and the waters came down from underneath the right side of the house on the south side of the altar. And he brought me out of the way of the northern gate and led me outward unto the gate that looked eastward. So what are we doing here? And behold, it ran out of the waters on the right side. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing Ezekiel saying, he brought me up on this side and there's waters coming out and waters coming out, and he brought me over to this side and there's water coming out and water coming out. So he's describing, if you can imagine seeing a temple or a building even, right? And from the thresholds of the doors and stuff, it says water is trickling out from all the sides and it's coming out. And he's describing it's pointing eastward and all these things because that's a kind of a geographical thing. It's a fun little bit of research if you want to do it about the temple, where it sets and the face that it does, because he's talking about something actual geographic that you can go look at on planet Earth right now, and we're about to see some of the rest of it. And in verse 3 through right around 7 and 8, what we see is he describes, and I encourage you to read it verbatim here, but what he starts to describe after this of saying there's water coming out of these thresholds, and he says, then the man, the one that's taking him on this tour, took and measured 1,000 cubits, and means basically a long distance. 1,000 cubits, a cubit is about from here to here. So he says he lays out 1,000 of them, and they go, and now that trickling water that was coming out has grown, and now it's a kind of it's up to my ankles, you know. So if you can imagine kind of a little stream that starts to form, and then it gets a little deeper. Now it's ankle deep. And he says, and then we go another, 1,000 cubits, and now it's up to my waist. Now it's deep here. And he continues on. He says, and now it's a river that you couldn't pass if you wanted to. So this water that's flowing from where? From the temple. What is the temple? The presence of God. And as he describes it, he says, now we look as on his way back from seeing this water that trickles from a little bit to ankle deep to waist deep to just, you couldn't even pass it. It's so wide. And in fact, it goes all the way to the Dead Sea. That's the geographical thing he's describing, his temple to the the Dead Sea. And so he says, he followed this and it got so big that you couldn't even pass it, and it dumped into the Dead Sea. And it said that when this water that comes from the temple, from the presence of God, travels through the desert and it hits the Dead Sea, it says the salt water of the Dead Sea becomes fresh water, and then fish go to live in it, and people are going to live off of this. And it says that trees start to grow around the Dead Sea, and that all on the banks of the river, from the ankle deep areas, that green things start growing. And so life is being brought into this dead space, and it is going into the Dead Sea and bringing the Dead Sea from salt, unlivable, unusable waters into fresh water. New life is born. Now come now, people. Come now. Let's think about this for a minute. What could this vision possibly be describing? Does it not sound so eerily similar? That's because that's exactly what it is. This is a vision given to Ezekiel that is looking towards the New Testament, saying, look, something's going to happen in which the very presence of God that you could not approach for purification and all the dead things around is going to start coming out of the presence of God. It's going to come out, and it's going to start flowing, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it actually begins to completely make the desert a livable place, make the dead waters live waters. It's actually going to be something that comes out and affects the entire world around. This is the idea of this purification, salvation through water, purification of a holy thing. And no longer is it going to be that the unholy thing contaminates the holy thing, or the unclean thing contaminates the clean. Now it's going to be that this clean thing is going to come, and it's actually going to cleanse the things that it touches, and it's actually going to flow from the presence of God. It's going to grow bigger and bigger, and it's going to start growing things where things did not grow before, where dead things, where new things live. And this is the act of baptism. And this is the idea of cleansing from the Old Testament, now looking forward to the New Testament. So those are two visions, guys, that we are given that kind of start to take us from the cleansing rituals of the Leviticus, showing us, okay, here's the problem of holiness and of purity and what needs to happen to be back at one with God, like it was in Genesis with Adam and Eve. And then it says, now let's look forward to what we call the New Testament, to the time of the Messiah, to the time of Christ. Look at what's going to happen. It's going to be turned upside down. Something radical is going to happen. Ezekiel saw it. Isaiah saw it. And now we're going to begin to look at that in the coming days as well. The New Testament of what does this mean, of this holiness and purification? What are we to do about this needing of cleansing? And how is God going to resolve this problem of holiness? So let's look at a little bit of a challenge that we're going to have for today, and we will see you guys.